Hi, this is Brok with dRofus. I'm going to walk you through our new ACC integration. The main reason why we put together this presentation is to explain a little bit about why we built this integration and what we're trying to solve. I'll also demonstrate some of the features so you'll get a chance to understand how it works before you install it. Some of the key features around what we built is really to make it easier to push data from a design file in Revit into dRofus without actually needing Revit open. The manual process that you use today with our Revit integration means that you have to actually have it installed on your desktop and manually synchronize data from the design file into dRofus. What we're doing with the ACC integration is we're making this more automated and simpler so that you can do this with any browser. Now, there are three current methods. There might be more methods that we provide in the future that I'm going to demonstrate. And each of these methods I'll break down in a more specific aspect. But the first method is used to keep rooms linked that are already linked within Revit in sync. So think of that as in Revit, you've linked a series of rooms, and all you want to do is synchronize the data, meaning push the Revit information into dRofus. The second method is maybe you have rooms that are in a published file on ACC, and you want to create new rooms in dRofus. And then the third method basically pulls this all together, where you can create rooms, you can remove rooms, and you can synchronize rooms that are actually matched. Now, I will talk about the nuances of each of those as I go through them, but those are the primary use cases that we've identified. The first thing that you'll end up doing when you'll log in to our system is you'll have to authenticate, allowing us to connect to your data. This is essentially a handshake between dRofus and Autodesk so that the data that's actually hosted on ACC can be used to then populate into dRofus. What you'll see is a screen that requires you to sign in to Autodesk, and this gives us access to the Autodesk data for your specific project. You'll populate your Autodesk credentials, and you'll see an authorization application here where you're basically granting the ability for us to access the data that is inside of your ACC project related to the AEC Data Model API, and this allows us to actually extract that data. Syncing with the Revit model settings is kind of an initial step that you have to do within Revit. The configuration is what we use to pull the data from ACC into Revit. So the first thing you really have to do is specify the project that you want to connect to, the hub that you want to connect to, and the attribute configurations that you want to use. So you will need to have a BIM admin within Revit who is connected to a dRofus project to set up that configuration. Our customer success team can also help configure this for you if you're unfamiliar with how this process might actually be done within dRofus. Each time that you're interacting with our configuration, you will see a pop-up message in the top right corner, which tells you what actions are currently being done. For example, when the sync has started or when a sync has completed. When a sync has started, you'll see a message that relates to that an email will be sent to you when the sync is complete. And when the sync is complete, you'll also see a message that actually says what we were able to do, whether we created new rooms, whether we synchronized a series of rooms that we found, or whether any rooms were actually removed. This is an example of what that email looks like. You'll see a little attachment. It has a short log, and that log clarifies when it happened, what ACC project was being used, what dRofus project was being used, what version of that design file was being used, what configuration was used, and then the actions, whether we found a certain number of rooms that we matched, and if we were able to synchronize those, and when the sync finished. So this little log is a really valuable way of understanding what data transactions were actually done between ACC and dRofus. So let's talk about method one. The purpose of method one and the assumption that we're making here is that the rooms are already linked to dRofus. You've already used the Revit integration. You've already made a connection between the Revit rooms and the dRofus rooms. And now that that connection is made, what you would want to do is synchronize those rooms to pull in the design data. We can't write to Revit with this integration. This integration can only read from Revit. If in the future the AEC data model from Autodesk provides the ability to write to those design files, we might be able to do a full sync. But in the case of syncing data, what we're really talking about is pulling the design data from Revit. So an example of that could be the design area, it could be room number, some of those things that you often find within Revit that you're pulling into dRofus. So think of method one as pulling data of rooms that are already linked. The configuration is done in Revit. The rooms are already linked using Revit. The difference here is the model is hosted on ACC. So the Revit user has published a workset enabled file to ACC, and from there we can use that file to synchronize. Here are the steps of how you do that. The first thing you do is you log into dRofus Web, you open up Model Settings, and then you select the tab called Sync with Revit. From there, you pick the hub, the ACC project, the configuration that you need, but none of those options need to be checked related to add new or delete unmatched. You can leave all of those unchecked. And then you can sync rooms. If you choose, you could also use an option to check the box next to automatically sync rooms on publish. What automatic publish does is each time a new file is published, we will automatically trigger this configuration and actually create those new modifications. And next, I'll show a quick video of how this is done. For this method one, you'll find that I have a room already in dRofus that has an additional number associated to it. That's the IFC GUID that's in the Revit file. And I have nothing checked, and I have a configuration that's tied using that as the key. And I want to populate the room number, the room name, and the comment here by synchronizing with this room. Even though this is set to automatic sync, I can still press this button. I will get a result in my email, and when it's concluded, I'll get a message up here at the top. So one room has been synced. So if I just refresh the view over here in dRofus, you can see that it updated with the name, the room number, and the note. For method two, we're going to be creating rooms in dRofus. And this means that we're using Revit as our source of truth to generate new rooms that don't exist in dRofus. Now, one of the things to keep in mind here is that we are making a couple of assumptions. That the rooms are not linked to dRofus already, and that the configuration that we're using defines that there's a ability to pull rooms from Revit into dRofus based on uniqueness. Meaning that there is a key, an attribute already in Revit that is unique that we can use to identify that room and to bring it into dRofus. Obviously, the model has to be hosted on ACC. Same process as before, where you open dRofus Web, you select Model Settings, you select Sync with Revit, you pick a project, select a configuration, but the difference here is you check the box next to Add New. This is how we know you're wanting to create new rooms in dRofus based on new rooms that we're finding from those files. Same thing, the option of actually automating this, you can check that box next to automatic sync if you'd like to do so. So in this case, you click sync room, and we're looking for new rooms as well as synchronizing rooms that are already linked. And we'll walk through how this works. For method two, you'll find that I've got the checkbox for add new now selected, and I'm filtering all of the rooms in the project without a function number, because when new rooms are created through a sync, they come in without an actual function associated to them. I'm going to select sync room, It's checking the files that it has access to. And it has created 54 rooms and one was synced. And that was the room that we had earlier. So if I refresh the view here, we'll see that I've got my 54 rooms that were created, and they all came in and with a new function number associated to them. What's also happened, if I look at the properties, you'll see that those things were also populated. The room name, the room number, and any comments associated to it. For method 3, we're going to pull all of this together, where new rooms can be created, rooms that were deleted, as in actually removed as unplaced rooms in Revit. Make sure that if you want to delete the rooms, you're also deleting them from a Revit schedule so they're not unplaced. And we would be synchronizing rooms that are already connected to dRofus. One of the things to keep in mind is that when rooms are created from ACC, they are created without a function number. They essentially don't have any functions associated to them. And by doing that, we know that those rooms are not planned rooms that were previously planned in dRofus using the function structure. So those are the only rooms that we can delete when they are associated without a function. The other control system here is you must be an admin in order to delete rooms in dRofus. So keep in mind that you might need one more level of permission beyond just having full room rights and full model rights in order to delete rooms. Same thing as before, the process is very simple. One of the things to keep in mind is once you've selected a project, you can also see the models that we are finding within ACC. So there's no way to specify which models you want to sync with. You'll sync with any models that you see. So keep in mind that from a permission standpoint, what you have permission to view within ACC is the same permissions that we're using within the integration. So some of the things that you'd want to configure if you want to use all of the features is you want to keep in mind that, one, we will be able to delete rooms that don't have a function. So before you run this synchronization, if there are rooms that you want to protect, just move those to a function using either the web or the desktop application. And then those rooms would be protected from being deleted. When you're going through the configuration, you'd want to check the box next to delete unmatched in order to include that ability to remove rooms. And in this case, we've got the add new, the delete unmatched, both checked, and we have automation checked. So essentially, every time a new file is published, we are going to go through all of those actions. Some of the technical things to keep in mind. The configuration is key here. The configuration needs to have an attribute that exists both in dRofus and in Revit. We know that room ID and room function numbers often used as a key, but in the case of using Revit, you're able to write those keys into the Revit model. In this case, we can't write to the Revit file as part of this configuration. So our suggestion is to use an attribute that will always be unique and exist in Revit. So a good example of that is the IFC GUID. The other thing to keep in mind is that mapping to Revit will be ignored, known as partially support, meaning that if in your configuration you're actually still pointing to write to Revit, rather than editing that configuration, we're just ignoring it, and you'll see partially supported next to the configuration if we find any fields are still mapped in the direction of trying to write to Revit. Mapping from Revit to dRofus is limited to rooms at this time, so keep in mind that if in the future we make improvements to maybe go beyond rooms, we'll let you know. The permissions that are necessary is that the dRofus user needs to have modeling rights, and if they are needing to change the Revit configuration, they will need to have BIM admin rights within Revit. The other aspect that the dRofus user needs is full room permissions. You might know this as level 1 room rights. Those two permissions are required within dRofus. Model rights being full and room rights being full. And if the user needs to delete, they still need to have dRofus admin level permissions. On the Autodesk side, the user needs to be able to use ACC. They don't actually need a license of design collaboration to use our integration. They only need access to docs. Now you will need design collaboration to publish new design files. So if you're on the publishing of new design files team, you will need design collaboration. But if you're the consumer of that data and you're a dRofus user, all you need to do is be on the ACC project with read-only rights to the folders where the design files are located. Let's see how this works. For method 3, you'll find that I've got both boxes checked for add new, delete unmatched. And I've got 3 rooms here that are all called stair that currently do not have a function, so they're not protected from being deleted. If I'm in Revit and I want these rooms to be gone, meaning I want them to be gone in Revit and I want them to be gone in dRofus, I can select them within a schedule and hit delete. So just to show you where these rooms exist, there's 3 stairs. I don't want them in Revit and I don't want them in dRofus. So I'm going to delete them from the whole project. That removes their tags. So naturally, those rooms don't exist in 3D and they don't exist as unplaced rooms. I then am going to come into the system and hit synchronize. Before I do, I need to make sure that the changes that have been made in Revit are being published back to the ACC space. So I'm going to synchronize with Central, and then I'm going to publish this file as a new file on ACC. And I do that by first saving the file. And then if I refresh the view here, this is where this model exists. You see it hasn't been published, and I need to publish the latest version. And as that's published, I'll be able to use that feature to synchronize. Now that the model has published, I'm going to use the Sync Rooms button with the Delete Unmatched. And what we'll find is that these 3 rooms will end up getting deleted. There's the update. And when I refresh over here, you'll see those stairs are deleted. Some questions that might come up when you're using this integration to keep in mind. You do need to have Revit 2025, and we are using Autodesk Construction Cloud, not BIM 360. The AEC data model must be activated in the ACC account admin. And if you don't know how to activate the AEC data model, be sure to check the documentation from Autodesk on how to turn on the AEC data model feature. You do need to be an admin of the ACC account to turn on that activation. Once it's on and our application has been installed, then the users can use this integration how you've seen it today. If there are other attribute configurations, you can use those to map against. So for example, if you created a configuration that just updates the design area, you could choose that in the configuration and hit sync rooms and it will only do that. So there's no limit to the number of configurations you might want to have with the ACC integration. The automatic feature, if you have it turned on, is triggered using a webhook, meaning that we're listening to see if there's a new ACC version of that design file published. And if it does get published and we have access to that folder, we'll see that that actually has happened and it will trigger a synchronization. And when that sync is done, you'll get an email, whether it's automated or you're doing it manually. Some other things to keep in mind is that you can set up the automation and you can still sync even though the automation is actually happening. What I mean by that is that if automation is turned on and you want to sync, you can just hit the sync button. If you want to turn automation off, you can uncheck the box, automation is turned off, and then you can do any manual syncs that you might want to do, and then turn it back on. So for example, if you've got an automation for certain synchronization, but you want to do something different, maybe you just want to update room numbers, you can turn off automation, select the configuration that might be just for room numbers, use that sync, and then turn automation back on. So at any point, you can kind of interrupt the automation that might be turned on. One thing to keep in mind that if you uncheck automation and someone else has turned it on, when you turn it on, it'll be under your profile that it's been turned on to. So keep in mind that if someone already has turned on automation, you're turning their automation off, emails are now going to be coming to you when you turn it on, rather than the emails going to them. If the configuration changes, so someone is in Revit and they've modified that configuration, we'll continue to use that within the ACC integration. What that means is that at any point, a Revit configuration with dRofus can be modified, and we'll pick up that modification when the ACC integration is actually used. Now, there are times where automation might fail. We might time out with the AEC data model. Maybe something is taking too long waiting for Autodesk, and we basically said we've tried multiple times, but the Autodesk AEC data model is still going, and we weren't able to actually synchronize. We'll let you know. It might also fail if the configuration wasn't a good configuration. Maybe you didn't have the right key, or maybe the configuration was trying to map to fields that we don't support. We're continuously monitoring what fields and what parameters we can support within the AEC data API. What happens if the logs source changes? So the ACC will be listed as a change source in the logs. So what I mean by that is if you make a modification to dRofus, whether you're using the desktop or the web or Revit, you'll see a source of change in the logs on the rooms. When ACC is used, you'll actually see ACC listed in that change source in the logs. Much of this documentation is on our help documentation, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us either through social or through our support portal. Thanks.